YouTube, Instagram, wherever you see or hear us. Um, it's a snow day. So, yes, I am at home because, well, I don't know how bad the roads are, but I know no Texan is going out on these roads currently. So, all right, today we're going to be talking about primitive reflexes. What are they? And I think that's a good jumping off point is what are they? So, Heather, when parents come in, I just ask them, who have you seen? What therapies have you seen? Who have you seen? What have they done? And commonly ask, has anybody looked at primitive reflexes? Do you know if they have any? Have any been integrated? All that fun stuff. And oftentimes, I just kind of get, I've never heard of that before, or I'm not sure what that is. And it's not the parents' responsibility to know that stuff inherently, but I think it's an important part of telling the kid's story, right? Is understanding where they are neurologically. And so we go over those, and I like to point them out and say, this is positive, or we found this, and so let's kind of jump into that. Brain development, I've worded it previously. It's kind of like there's a recipe to it, right? Like we want certain ingredients at certain times, and that's how we get the ideal kind of brain development, right? Like, and so we all had sort of roundabouts, and we've all kind of done our own thing, but ultimately there's kind of a generic recipe, and part of that recipe includes primitive reflexes. So I'm a parent. What is a primitive reflex, and why would I care about it?
Yes. What I tell parents is that we're all born with primitive reflexes. They're little infant survival mechanisms because in mama's womb, life is good. All our needs are taken
Yeah.
care of. And then we enter the world, we have no way to convey our wants, needs, thoughts intentionally. So we act on survival instinct. For example, a baby can't say, Daddy, Mama, I'm hungry, where's my food? But that reading reflex, they're going to find the source of that food. We have 8 of those that we look at, but they are supposed to go away very, very young in development. They start going away as early as 3 months. There are a couple that can lag till a couple years old. Most of them are gone before the age of 1. And when those stick around, it is sort of like having bugs. And if your brain is the computer, the primitive reflexes are bugs in the computer that keep you from growing your sensory motor system. And we know sensory motor system is the foundation for everything else. And so then we go through those one by one and talk about how each one specifically will impact emotions, behaviors, focus, all kinds of cognitive abilities, reading, and so forth. And you
Yeah.
know what? One
Yeah.
other thing that really has made a big difference that in the past couple of years I've sort of added to that is to really talk about how everyone on the planet has a certain cognitive capacity. This is how much I can take. And when I get to here, that's my tipping point. And so that can look like meltdowns, lash outs, or withdrawal, pulling back from social situations or task avoidance with homework, because those primitive reflexes cause your brain to have to sprint through
Mm,
routine tasks that are meant to be automated. And when that happens, the needle moves much, much faster on that state of overwhelm. Now I only have this much space to regulate emotions, this much to focus, this much to take in that academic information before I've had it. So they are gas guzzlers in the brain as well.
mm. Yeah, kind of like a bucket overfilling, right? Like there's just a
Mm-hmm.
point where the bucket can only hold so much. So let's take a step back. So we're born with them, but they're also important in the womb, right? Like, oh my goodness, not moral, but the
Well, like the spinal galant,
yes,
it's
yes,
stimulation of the spinal galant that helps babies move through the birth canal.
yeah.
Yeah.
And oh, I completely blanked on this one. I had it just a second ago, but oh my goodness, this is terrible. But there is the one of the reflexes they thought was involved with it's not the moral, but the other one was involved with toxins, and when something is happening to mom, that's they're pulling away, and so this is important for survival in the womb, getting out of the womb, and then kind of the initial start to life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so okay, so let's just say okay, we're supposed to have them in the womb. Is it possible to be born without them? Like, could that happen? Is that a possibility?
Um, that's such an interesting question. I've not read that. I do know we've had a lot of kids where they are sort of they can go into hibernation.
Mm,
So if you test them, the test comes out negative, but then as our kids start progressing through the program, they manifest, and it doesn't mean that they weren't there initially, that is actually forward progress. Hibernation is more than having it present severely. But as we're getting that body-brain connection going, they reveal themselves and then go away. And they
Yeah,
can
yeah.
reappear. That they can that go away and reappear as well with brain injury, dementia, things like that. We assess adults who still have these primitive, they still have them or they've reappeared after an event.
So hibernation meaning they're dormant. Is that what you were saying by that?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's right.
yeah. Yeah, and believe it or not, no, I know you believe it, but that's one of the things they kind of I've been reading more research. Like, oh, look, we had kids with primitive reflexes, and then we're seeing it now in dementia, and so they're trying to make that correlation, and they're like, oh, this is still connected. So it's interesting. But to your point, like, we've had athletes come in, and they're whatever 16, 17, football player, QB, good grades, just kind of like a, all American kind of kiddo, right? Like you paint a picture and he's just ideal, grades, sports, just awesome kid. And then they get clocked in the head. It's like a switch, and they're struggling with academics. They may be struggling on the field. Their normal relationships are now strained, and so when you take a look at them, they suddenly have primitive reflexes. So let's kind of talk to that, because I think there's a lot of confusion within just kind of the whole health field as far as that goes. Because I always hear competing ideas in this, right? But my perspective is the head trauma allows those reflexes to come back, right? Like they were once dormant, not dormant, but they were once integrated
Integrated.
appropriately, and then now the head trauma has caused kind of a reversal of that.
Mm-hmm. No, that happens a lot, and I think it's fair to mention this because we're talking about trauma to the brain. That sometimes when kids have a trauma to the brain, whether it's multiple concussions or something more that is more evident at the time, sometimes it appears that they kind of come away from that unscathed. But then
Mm.
fast forward 3, 5, 7 years when they are in a stage of life where a different parts of the brain are being called upon to work together on like next level. The part where that infarct or that injury happened, it becomes evident because I didn't have high expectations of that at the age it happened. So keep an eye on your kids, even if something happened years ago. It doesn't, hopefully, yeah, there are times where it's mild, it resolves great, but that is not necessarily the case. And studies show that only 1 to 2% of those with mild traumatic brain injuries. Mild doesn't mean we're talking about physiologically it might be called mild, but the manifestations of it can be quite larger. Only 1 to 2% of students who should be receiving services as the result of that are because that connection is not being made because it can be years apart.
Yeah, happens a lot in 2, 3 year olds, big head trauma, but they don't look, kids are great at masking a lot of that stuff, right? Just because age and sometimes the behavior doesn't dramatically change at that point in time, or the stressors on them aren't enough to really elicit some of the internal struggles that they're going through.
That's
But go ahead.
I was just going to say, just to really put some science to this, Dr. Susan Blythe, she is one of the internationally leading researchers on child development. And she did a meta-analysis, which means she looked at 316 studies is the number I have in my head across the globe and like consolidated all the information. What are these 316 studies telling us? Of course, this represented multi thousands of students across all cultures and ages. And those who were struggling, whether it's socially, emotionally, behaviorally, academically, the report is 100% of them have primitive reflexes. That it's always hard to believe when it's 100%. So I don't know if the number was 99.98 and they're calling it 100. But the summation of that study is it's 100% have primitive reflexes. These are tied to autism, ADHD, attention, emotional dysregulation, reading struggles, just et cetera, all kinds of learning challenges. And for students in elementary school where teachers and parents aren't having any concerns, maybe about 1/3 of them might have one or something sticking around on a mild level, but not all 8 of them. But that just shows you the 100%. That's how strong the link is. This is really seems to be beyond theory to it is just so consistent in the research how tied this is to these struggles.
100%. Yeah. If you're reading the leading research and what the experts are saying, this is the conclusion. Unfortunately, though, there's just not that education hasn't reached down into some of the school systems, right? So as doctors are coming up and maybe some other professionals are coming up, they're just not haven't quite caught that information. So there can be a lot of confusion there. But 100%, that's the same research I've read. I mean, you can never say anything is truly definitive, but I mean,
Yeah.
it's as close as you're getting to
Right.
it. And so 100%, yeah, I completely agree. And that's what I see. Any kid that comes in with academic issues, I'm already kind of running through kind of as I'm talking to the mom, like what reflexes I think will be there. And there's a strong pattern, right? And so, but one of the things I want to kind of just touch on is, um, I know there are a lot of health professionals out there who kind of looking at this. One of the things that I've learned, and let's talk a little bit about this, and this kind of goes back to your bucket being full thing, is sometimes you have to stress those reflexes a little bit. You can go through these reflexes pretty quick. And I've seen kids, as you kind of stress that reflex, they get worse and worse and worse. Meaning they have maybe a little bit of resilience there, right? Like a little bucket. And then as you keep filling that up, it overflows. But if you did a quick kind of analysis, it may not be as prominent. And is that what you see as well? If you give it a little bit more, I'll say stress, but if you kind of try to trigger it a few times, you tend to see a stronger response.
Yes. So many of the parts of we're looking at hundreds and hundreds of things in the assessment, and so many things, even if it comes to like cross body, like a cross crawl where you're touching your right hand to your left knee. That's hard to do if you have primitive reflexes because it impacts that development. But any of these things, kids might be able to stay still and not have that reflex when you stimulate it, but then you do it a few more times and it shows up. Or they can do cross body movements, 3-5 times, and then they can't cross. That shows you that what they are doing. That's why I always say it is not just about, can my child do XYZ, yes or no? Can they do this math worksheet? Can they read? Can they focus sometimes? How hard are they churning to do it? Because if they are churning to do it, those are not skills that they are choosing. I'll do it right now and I won't right now. Sometimes it looks like an attitude. If they're interested in something, they'll do it. If they're not, they won't. It means they're working too hard at it. I can only do it for so long. If you're lifting weights for the first time, you can't do as many reps because you got to build up your tolerance. They are, and in real life, it's hard to think of anything we do in life that only requires one skill. We got multi-systems working together. If we're testing something in isolation and they can only do it for so long and then lose it, how does that apply to when they have distractions at school and stresses, and the performance is going to fall even further often from what it looks like in an assessment?
Right. I mean, you make a great point because really, in the clinic, I don't want to use the term. I'll use kind of like a sterile environment, right? Like there's just not as much demand inherently in a clinic in a room by yourself with maybe a parent and a doctor versus say like in a classroom with maybe 10 or 20 other kids with the teacher speaking to you. So you have to sometimes do a little bit more poking and prodding, especially if it's not as available, right? Because I got some kids and it's just off the bat, like, just there's no 3 seconds. I already know, I can see it. It's just already happening. And some kids, well, my favorite kids are the kids that are really, all my kids are really smart, but they're trying to figure out what I'm trying to do. So they intentionally try to fix the exam for their favor, right? Like, I had this one kid a couple days ago. He's like, "Am I doing this correctly?" And he's he's trying to correct himself. Funny, but they sometimes skew it, intentionally or unintentionally. But you have to push a little bit harder. But as I started pushing, not when I mean push, I mean like testing. When I started testing him a little bit harder over a longer period of time, he started falling apart. But it was funny because he was trying to beat it, and it made me laugh at it. But okay, so we're born with these. They should go away. Most should go away within the first year. Okay, we know there is a strong, we'll say almost definitive connection between academics and these primitive reflexes. And one thing I want to talk about, we kind of touched on this too, is this can come up, so they can be integrated, which means that they've appropriately gone, or they've appropriately been developed, and then trauma can cause them to revert back. Anything else that you think is really important in that kind of context as far as reflexes go that maybe isn't discussed frequently?
Um, I mean, to put it the most
That's a big
simplistically, is
question.
that
So,
there's a couple things that pop to mind. And one is, just to boil this down to a one sentence thing, is that when primitive reflexes are present in kids when they are supposed to have integrated, that indicates an immature brain. It is immaturity in the
mm,
central nervous system. It means that a lot of what they're doing that is supposed to be intentional is reactive. It is not under their control. And so I think that's important to know. And I, that I like metaphors, analogies. It just sort of paints a picture when we're
mhm.
talking neuro. Um, I mean, we love talking about the brain, but for some people, like, are you serious? But so think about the difference between you're cooking something that y'all have once a week at home, and you're talking to the kids, your husband, planning the weekend, you're throwing the meal together. You don't have to think about it. That's automation. When there's a brand new recipe and you have to actually fold in the cheese, what does that mean? Fold in the cheese. And you're having to think about the process. And your spouse says the same thing they said yesterday with the other one. Honey, stop. I got to focus on this. Everything is more laborious.
Mm.
Or another example is, think about driving. Think about the very first time you were behind the wheel, or if you have kids who are learning to drive, they are white knuckling it. And they're having to think, they're giving you whip, like how hard to hit the gas pedal, brake pedal, where's my blind spot, which mirror, blinker, do I have time to turn? I'm not sure. Because of that, they can't have a fluid conversation with you because 100% of their systems are on this one thing. All of us, when we're driving, we can have a conversation, plan our weekend, because 90% of what we're doing behind the wheel, we don't even have to think about it. It's easy peasy. Our finger goes to the blinker, we glance in the mirror, we smoothly operate the pedals, we know whether we can turn or not. Easy peasy. So my brain is freed up to handle that conversation or to plan something else. These primitive reflexes are the brand new driver. And so they are having to work harder at each part of a process, even if they get an A, even if they manage to hold it together and you're just like, they're just shy. Maybe they're internalizing the struggle. It impacts quality of life. It's not just
Mm.
about, can my child do this? In order to achieve it, are they churning? Are they in automation mode? Enormous difference in quality of life. And that is why these impact emotions, behaviors, and cognitive skills and social skills.
Okay, well, you actually jumped to the next point, which I wanted to make, which was reflexes are automatic. These kids are not thinking about these. It is when you step on a tack, your foot pulls up. It's not, oh, that hurts, maybe I should pull my foot up. It does it automatic. Whether or not, before the pain even hits your cognition, your foot has already responded to that. That's the same with these other reflexes, right? Is they are all background programs that are running, and they're looking for a stimulus to fire them off. You have no idea that they're being fired, right? So 90% of your brain is all automation in the background. No thought process involved, all automated. And so when think about this. These predominantly, these reflexes should all be gone within 12 months. So if they're not in your 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, whatever your age may be, you're essentially kind of working with the neurology of a 1-ish year old kiddo, right? As far as that all goes. Would that be correct? Is that kind of a good summation? Is there another way you'd maybe word it?
I agree with all of that. And what makes it tricky sometimes again, like you said, it's not parents' fault because this is not obvious. This is not
Mm,
intuitive. So, well, my kids make straight A. They're reading at a third grade level. So they have this reflex that impacts reading. It doesn't mean that means they have a lot of skills involved in reading. Reading involves a ton,
right.
hundreds probably, of skills working together. They are compensating, they are making up for the fact that they have that reflex and having to work harder to get that score.
Mm,
And so that we have kids all the time who are age 16 in this, age 11 in this, age 5 in this, age 8, like, and so those different parts of the brain don't know how to work together because they are all on different playing fields. Brain clash instead of connectivity.
Love it. And then one thing I also want to touch on. Okay, so we're born with these; they can come back. Um, it it does affect academics, relationships, emotional behavior, cognitive thinking, cognitive flexibility. So there's a lot to this. But one of the things that I know we both see a lot of is autonomic dysfunction, right? Too. So this part of the brain stem where a lot of these reflexes are housed, right, is very intimately tied to the autonomic function, right? And so we see a lot of autonomic dysfunction, right? So where we see GI issues, immune hyperactivity or hypoactivity, so always sick or never sick. Okay, so that's also important too. Like it's okay to be sick
Bedwetting.
every now and then, but you got
Yeah.
kids who are like, I haven't been sick in ever. You're like, okay, that's not how quite how this should work, but I'm happy you haven't been sick, but um, and I actually had a gentleman come in, one of the fathers come in, he's like, yeah, I haven't been sick in 35 years. I was like, okay, all right, well, we should talk about this a little bit, but there's a balance, right? There's a natural kind of balance in the system that we should have, and so that gets really skewed in the autonomics, and we see that. Talk to me a little bit about what you see, because a lot of the kids I see with primitive reflexes, I would say 100%, but it doesn't always come out. They don't maybe always understand exactly what's happening, but they all have some sort of GI issue, right? Whether it be absorption, constipation,
Mhm.
diarrhea, reflexes, all there's all something there, right?
Yes, about 90% of our students have at least some sort of GI system, even if it's mild issue. I mean,
Yeah.
and sometimes those are really obvious, and sometimes they're not at all.
Yep.
They're keep this in mind. I'm so glad you brought this up because a lot of times, the kids are complaining to their parents of tummy aches, headaches. This feels weird. That feels weird in their body, and it can very easily look like the kids are making it up to get attention
Mm,
or to avoid going to school. They don't want to take that test that day. Or, yeah, you're emotionally dysregulated. So that anxiety, y'all know if you are, how you get butterflies in your stomach if you're nervous, or you get a knot in your stomach and you're not very hungry, maybe if you're really sad, things like that. So that shows the emotion and body connection. But because of that, it can really make us miss the fact that, wow, their stomach really does hurt
mm,
because their intestinal motility is not breaking down foods for proper absorption. So even if they're not overtly constipated, diarrhea, that kind of thing, it doesn't mean nothing's wrong. And that stomach ache might be more than the emotion or an excuse. It might really be that they eat certain foods and their bodies aren't processing it properly. The brain tells the gut how to process food. We
mm,
have a lot of students who will have accidents from time to time, or that, and they may even seem to be potty trained, and then it comes back later. But when we are going into a fight or flight response, I mean that is our nervous system at play here. The oxygen, blood flow, everything is going to survival. It impacts when we're hungry, when we're thirsty, whether we need to use the bathroom, whether we pick up on those signals, digestion. So that the body brain connection means that heightened emotions that come from these primitive reflexes, the churn that comes from these, also can have physical ramifications now or in the future. It sets you up for a higher chance of type 2 diabetes,
mm.
arthritis, strokes, cancer, autoimmune disease, etc. It doesn't mean that will happen, but there's a higher propensity for it.
100%.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, I mean, I've had two kids come in recently. I can't, whatever the time frame was, the past few months, but um, both when transitioning back to school or starting school, um, both started having accidents. Okay, guess what I found? Autonomic dysfunction and primitive reflexes. So,
Yeah.
yep. But you got to dig for these sometimes. Like these always. Sometimes there are subtle signs, right? Like I love the stomach pain because that is a common symptom that they're not making the connection, right?
Yeah.
It's just not the connection that there's an understanding there, and so that's really important. And so, I always call us kind of like we're neurodetectives, right? We're looking for the subtle cues. Stomach pain means something to me, but they've been through all the tests and their GI system is fine, and maybe they had lab work and everything looks good. But that tells me something about autonomic function or how their brain is processing information. So very good. Okay, we are at the 25-minute mark. So we like to try to keep these between 25 and 30. Any last points that you would like to bring up or point out? I think we covered a good amount of information, at least about what they are and how they function. Anything else that you would like to touch on?
The only thing I want to say is, I mean, they are foundational for development. That's why we're spending time talking about them. But I
Mm-hmm.
also want to say that if you're bringing kids in, it's not enough to get the primitive reflexes to integrate, because the primitive reflexes presence has caused a ripple effect of other issues that just taking care of primitive reflexes will not be enough. And I want to make that really clear, because sometimes when I'm talking to families about this, that may not be obvious. And so, because primitive reflexes stalled other things, kids will not just catch up. So we have to address the totality of what's going on.
100%, 100%. Yeah, it's not always that. Well, there is some instances where you just the reflexes start going away, and then we see automatic. But a lot of times that's not the case. There's additional work that needs to be done, or things that need to be worked on as well. One of the things I want to just bring up, because I've seen it and I've started looking for it more, is your mouth breathers at night, something like this. They are guaranteed they have autonomic dysfunction. Okay, I would put money on it. But also, what I found is a very strong, very high correlation to primitive reflexes. And I think they've been mouth breathers since birth, and it's impacted brain development. So I just want to throw that out there. I personally don't do with anything with mouth. Oh, I refer you out to a different professional for that, an airway specialist, some dentists, and other people that we work with. But it is important because I've seen that get addressed, and it dramatically helps it, right? I mean, your brain needs what? Food, stimulation, and oxygen. So if one of these three is off, it impacts everything else. So
It does. Yeah. Oxygen flow to the brain. That's just, if you have kids with narrow palates, they need palate expansion, they're mouth breathers. That almost certainly has impacted. In fact, a, a sleep disordered breathing specialist that I work with closely has said, we started screening our kids after we met you. This was years ago. And we realized 100% of our kids had brain development issues, and we hadn't even stopped to think about it. They said
yeah,
100% of their patients. Yeah.
well, yeah, it's 100%. I mean, you look at their faces, their palate is usually kind of, it depends, but a lot of times peaked. It's affecting airway in here. They got dark I mean, I had a 4-year-old come in with dark bags under his eyes. I'm like,
Yeah.
she could have been 65. I was like, this is nuts. But when you breathe through your mouth, it impacts facial development and everything else. And you can once you see it, you start seeing it. It's like you're like, oh, okay, I see that all the time now. But okay, all right, not to get off on another tangent, but I just thought I'd mention that because that is an important role, and a lot of times we will have you go see an airway specialist to make sure that we can coordinate care for best results. Okay, all right, Heather. Everybody loves the information you provide. Where can they find more of your amazing information
At
and knowledge?
Instagram or Facebook at the Hidden Churn or Brain Balance of the Woodlands, Katy, Mansfield, or South Lake.
Awesome. So go follow those pages. Always putting out great content. You also have another podcast Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Do you have one coming up this week?
I do. And this week it is about my child can pay attention if they want to. What's up with that? It so many times it looks like choice. I'm going to give you all of the foundational reasons why kids can pay attention sometimes and not others. Really dive in and what you can do to help.
Oh, that'll be a good one. Okay. Lots of parents do believe that. And I tell you what, listen to that podcast. I know it's not, there's a lot of amazing kids, but they do churn real hard. So go make sure you listen to that podcast. And we will be back next week. We're going to continue to kind of talk about primitive reflexes, but I talked to Heather, and we're going to kind of break down individual reflexes because I think it gives us a good understanding. And also, when you have a chance to actually kind of go more in depth on a particular reflex, you might say, hey, you know what? I'm seeing some of these symptoms, but I never had this checked. And so this is an important topic to talk about. And it really helps you understand. Again, I love that Heather brought this up and highlighted reflexes. These kids have no control over this. This is simply automated neurology in the background doing what it's supposed to do, but in an environment that's not, that it's just not meant to designed to function. So we'll jump more into this. I'm excited. I thought about for Valentine's, we're going to go with the moral reflex because that's related to the autonomics in the heart. So I thought about that. But aside from that, we're going to jump into some reflexes. I'm excited to talk about this. This is one of the things I love educating parents on. I think it's a topic that needs to be discussed because, like Heather said, 100% of kiddos, and I agree with this, 100% of kiddos with academic issues have some, if not more than one primitive reflex. So we're going to jump into this. We'll be back same time, same channels, back here. If you have any questions, concerns, thoughts, please comment. If this could help a family member, please share, teacher, whatever. Share this with teachers. Please, parents, if you have a teacher that's a friend or a family member, or you just have a connection with them, share this with them, because lots of teachers are struggling right now to help their kids. They don't know what to do. It's just, there's a lot. I have a couple of teachers that are patients, and they're like, why don't we ever get education on this? So please share this with teachers. I know they're going through a lot. There's a lot going on. Hopefully this can help them, and we hope this benefits you and your family. So, all right, we'll be back next week. Thank you, Heather, as always. Go make sure you follow her channels and pages. She has great content out there, and we will see you all next week.
Thanks, Brian. Stay warm, everyone.